Cheers, Joey. Thanks so much to the organisers for allowing me to come and speak to you on this really, really critical day about such an important issue. So I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional carers of this land, the Wurundjeri people, to their elders, past and present, and any other elders here today. So we work for the peak body for family violence services, and you might wonder, what has gender equality got to do with family violence? Well, in a nutshell, actually a lot. So we're in the business, we and our family violence service member organisations are in the business of trying to turn rates of violence against women around. And rates of violence against women in our community are horrific. You'd probably be aware there were 79 women, Australian women, murdered through violent circumstances just last year alone. There's 1 in 3 women will experience violence from an intimate partner during her lifetime. 1 in 5 will experience sexual assault. An Australian woman is hospitalised every 3 hours as a result of family violence. 3 women are hospitalised every week as a result of brain injury from family violence. It's a factor in over 60% of child protection issues, and as Joey said, it's a key driver of homelessness, and it's costing us. Costs the Australian economy $21.7 billion, that's billion, every year. So when we look at the causes of violence against women, historically we've tend to look at individual and simplistic factors, things like the perpetrator's psychological state or behaviours like drug and alcohol, or experiences like past experience of violence, or circumstances like unemployment. But what the research tells us, and research from the World Health Organization, from the World Bank, from the European Commission, from the UN, tells us consistently that a core causal factor of violence against women is gender inequality. So when we think about gender inequality in Australia, we can think that actually we've achieved that. You know, we're there because women can vote, they can go to work after they've had a child. Remember the old days when as soon as women had a baby, they would have to give up work. We would have to, women can divorce now or separate if they want. So certainly when we compare ourselves to other countries, we seem to be faring very well. But just let's test that a little bit. As Joey said, the gender pay gap is now 19%. The difference, and it's actually getting worse. In 2004 it was only 14%, so it's actually worsening. And here's a really clear example about why that matters, why a gender pay gap matters. When we changed the legislation in Victoria to allow women to remain in the home and have perpetrators removed for the very first time, we thought we'd be able to reduce the significant rates of homelessness experienced by women and all the things that come with that, like kids being taken from schools, disruption from their education, disconnection from their communities. But in fact, we've been not able to take as advantage of that as we hoped because of 2 reasons. One is it's really difficult for women to remain safely in their home, because often that's when the violence really escalates. But the other reason is because it's very difficult for women to afford to live independently because they're paid at such lesser rates than men. So Council to Homeless Persons did some research last year that looked at suburbs in Australia that were affordable to women on a pension with young children, and identified in Victoria there's only 1 suburb that she would be able to afford to live independently. Women's roles as carers, primary carers, has had a huge impact. Women are often more expected to take time out for work, to take care of the family, which disrupts their employment opportunities, and can also, that's where they can also be discriminated against in relation to promotion. But also we know that pay differences start at a very early age. recent research, just this week that was released, identified that this starts with kids pay pocket money. There's discrepancies in the rates at which we pay pocket money to girls and boys. Young graduates from university will immediately be paid less. Female candidates will be paid less in their first areas of work. We've got much fewer women in positions of leadership, so in our court system, as politicians. In fact, there's only 17% of CEOs across Australia who are women. And why does that matter? I think sometimes when women's groups call for gender equality, equal numbers of women in courts, pay equality, things like that, people can assume that we're calling for it just for parity's sake. But we know that this is absolutely critical, that countries where we have gender equality, there are much fewer rates of violence against women. So this is critical. When we look at the drivers of violence against women, there's three things, and this really shows what everyday people can do in improving the status of women and also reducing rates of violence against women. So firstly is the extent to which we as a community tolerate disrespectful attitudes towards women and make excuses for violence. So I think sometimes we understand the link between, say, racism and race-related violence, or homophobia and homophobic-related violence. We really need to strengthen our understanding about the links between sexism and violence against women. And this is what good men and good women can do on a daily basis, is challenge those attitudes. The other way is, and this is particularly at men, and we have men ask us all the time, what can we do? What can I do as a man to address violence against women? Well, we know that what influences men is what other men think. And when there's disrespectful attitudes towards women expressed in social areas, in our social groups, when violent supportive attitudes towards women are expressed and they go unchallenged, we know that this supports the conditions that allows violence against women to flourish. Men think the rest of the community agree that I can behave this way. So good men can challenge those kind of attitudes towards women amongst some men. And the other thing is the rigid stereotypes between men and women. We know this has a huge impact. So challenging the notion that the only role for women in our community is as either carers or sex objects. We really need to be raising young men and young women to be equal, to be respectful, and to ensure that we're aiming for both young men and young women to have equal outcomes in their lives. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen about this really critical issue. And thanks again to the organisers for such a wonderful event.